Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this episode of The Federal. My name is Naved Anjum, and I'm joined today by a very special guest, senior journalist Kunal Purohit, who has just come out with a beautiful book, H Pop, The Secretive World of Hindutva Pop Stars. You can see the cover here. Um, Kunal, welcome to this episode of The Federal. Thank you so much for taking the time out to join us.
Thank you so much for having me, Navid. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and I'm looking forward to our chat.
Right, right. So yeah, just by way of introduction, Kunal, of course, is a senior journalist. He has written extensively on the right wing politics, on hate crimes, on gender and justice. This book, of course, talks about this whole Hindutva, the world of the insidious and secret world of Hindutva pop stars and their entire kind of the ecosystem that they have and the how they sort of are given that kind of support and how they have sort of all of them are Kunal. Of course, you zero in on three people in this book. There is a there is a singer, there is a poet, and there's a publisher. But of course, this network is really, really huge that spans different states of India. And in this particular book, you zero in on three stories, which just give us a glimpse of just how insidious this entire thing is and how damaging it is to the interest of a secular country, and also the fact that all of them somewhere or the other peddle a certain kind of narrative which is closer to the nationalist agenda of the BJP, and and they are doing harm to the country in their own ways. But of course, in the Hindutva world, they're revered figures. They're celebrated. They're awarded. They're rewarded. So if you could, it all started in in a village in Jharkhand where you were there, and the story happened by serendipity, as you mentioned in the book. I just wanted to know if you could tell us a bit about the genesis of the book and how that led to you traveling across different states of the country in order to sort of investigate further into the story.
No, absolutely. As you said, this was an accidental discovery. The discovery of this genre of pop music that exists in the country. I think, like most of us now, I was also blissfully unaware of its existence till about March or April 2019, when I found myself in a small town in Jharkhand called Gumla. And I was there particularly to investigate a lynching of a 20-year-old Muslim man, and just sort of understand the circumstances that led to the lynching. What I found fascinating when I was sort of constantly talking to eyewitnesses, speaking to cops, trying to understand what could have triggered the lynching, I found that it had connections to a Ram Nami procession that had happened the same day, in the central part of Gumla, and that Ram Nami procession had something very distinct for the first time. For
Hmm.
the first time in the lives of all of these residents of Gumla, they had been seeing Ram Navami to be a very syncretic festival, like in so many different parts of the country, where prominent Muslims of Gumla would stand outside the mosque. They would be waiting for the procession to pass by. They would welcome Hindus with sort of refreshments. Sometimes they would shower petals. There were various things that would generally happen as syncretic practice that was being sort of that was something that Gumla had seen over the years. Except that one year, when the procession did come closer, and when the Muslims gathered, as usual, to sort of welcome these processionists, there was something strange that happened in that procession. And that strange bit which happened was that the procession suddenly switched its behavior, and became rather boisterous and aggressive, and almost menacing in the way they were looking at the Muslims who had gathered there. And what eyewitnesses told me, and I sort of spoke to multiple people about this, is that there was a song that was played in the procession. Just as the procession entered the lane where the mosque was, and that song had words to the effect that the skull cap of the Muslim cleric should be hurled on the ground, and that there should be bodily harm done to Muslims. And then that song sort of seemed to have galvanized people in that mob. Uh, Thankfully, in that moment, at least, there was nothing that happened, because the police were very quick to intervene and sort of diffuse the tensions. But some of the men who participated in that Ram Navami procession went back on their way, and about 3 kilometers outside of Gumla, they stumble upon this 20-year-old Muslim man who is talking to a Hindu woman who is from a nearby village, and they decide that they have to attack him because he's trying to lure the Hindu woman out, and he's trying to trouble her and harass her. And in that process they end up lynching him. They tie him to a street pole and they lynch him to death. And this is what struck me as being very alarming, as to just how could this one particular song, that, and I'd never heard of the song. I sort of asked myself, I said, how is it possible that one song is able to trigger such strong emotions within the mob, and possibly within the people who ultimately went and lynched Mohammed Shalik. And that sort of threw me into a rabbit hole of sorts, where I sat up that whole night, the first night when I found out about this lynching, when I was in Gumla, and I sat up and I just went online. I scrolled through the internet to just find out what these songs were, and what were they saying, what is the message that they were giving, and ultimately who were the people who were creating this music. So it's really that incident that led me to starting to investigate this. And then I mean, unsurprisingly and somewhat disappointingly for me, Naved, I sort of took that same question across Jharkhand, when I sort of, because Gumla was the first place I was coming to in my trip in Jharkhand, and I was slated to travel to multiple other districts. So every district I would go to, I would ask cops. I said, have you been hearing of anything of this sort? Have you been hearing of any music that is, polarizing or troubling? And all of them told me that they had all been having similar episodes, where in Ram Nami processions or in similar Hindu processions, some of these songs were played right when the mobs and the processions were crossing in Muslim dominated areas. And they were grappling with the question. They were sort of trying to figure out how to avoid a riot because of these songs. And that really just sort of threw me into this whole world, which I call the secretive world of Hindutva pop stars, to just understand who's creating all of this, and how is it really coming out.
All right, all right. Yeah, and it is, of course, it's a huge network of people, and as you mentioned, that there is an entire ecosystem involving a lot more people than it appears. I mean, you only see the artists, but there is this entire kind of there is a whole assembly line of people working for it. And I was just curious to know what made you settle on these three people. That is Kavi Singh, Kamal Agney, and Sandeep Deo. Sandeep Deo, of course, is shot to this thing. We came to know about him when this entire Bloomsbury episode happened. But these two people, and of course, you have passing references to other people, other artists also throughout the book. But these primarily these three narratives that you focus on. And if you could talk about these three people and what was it about their kind of art, or if we can call it as art, fascinating to you.
I mean, so when I started working on this, Navid, I wanted to, go beyond some of what I've done with my journalism, which is to track some of these activities online and in the digital world. We've seen that kind of reporting where the Hindu right wing's online existence has been scrutinized and has been understood to some extent. I wanted to know if there was also something happening offline. If there were actually events happening, or if there were people who were going amongst all of these people. Because my questions always were, what if the internet has not reached all of there people? Then are you able to actually get your message across? And so I started looking at active and at artists, who were having an emphasis on offline activities. They might have their online presence, but they were also doing things offline. And Kamal Agney, he's the poet I profiled in the book, and he's the prime example of what I wanted to do. Because here is he's barely 30, but he has crisscrossed the country. He's every time I pick up the phone, he's in a different part of the country. He's constantly traveling. He's one day in Rajasthan, another day in Uttarakhand, a third day in Chhattisgarh, then in UP. So he's going to these Kavi Sammelans, and he's performing Hindutva poetry across the country. And very few of these Kavi Sammelans actually happen in urban cities. Most of them happen in rural or semi-rural places. And so what essentially happens is that he's able to get to those audiences and drive the message of Hindutva home to these people, even in areas sometimes where the internet may not have penetrated all layers of society. So he was one such person. Similarly, with Kavi Singh, who is the singer I profiled, she was again someone who before COVID was constantly doing different events. She would do, they could be in universities, they could be for sometimes for BJP leaders. She would also be doing events which are for the Hindu right wing outfits. So she was doing these events where she was going and meeting people. And that for me was interesting. And of course, I mean, the fact that she's a woman doing this. Hindu nationalism and Hindutva has generally been a space which has been dominated by men. And it's a very masculine space because there is a lot of aggression, there is a lot of emphasis on anger and hate and violence, as the imagery that they sort of constantly seek to project. So I wanted to understand, what was a woman doing here, where there were very few women to begin with, and how does a woman then navigate this masculine space? And so that was my reason for choosing Kavi. With Sandeep Deo, again, he's a very interesting character because he does a lot of things. He's not just your YouTube influencer who's sitting and analyzing the events of the day. He's also running a publishing house which is printing real books. He's sending the books out to different parts of the country, and not just the country, different parts of the world as well, because I know people who are sitting outside of India but are still patrons of the books that he publishes. So here is he who's running a very successful book publishing business, but he's also trying to do other things. And I mentioned how one of his goals is to really start these sort of clinics, where Hindu men and Hindu boys can be taught the wisdom of the Vedas, and be also taught weapons and arms training in case they have to fight the enemy at some point. So here he's clearly doing a lot of offline activities, which were interesting to me because I feel like that is the space that we've not been able to track as much.
Hmm. Right. And it's very interesting. I mean, if you go by each of these stories, and especially Kavi Singh, for instance, there's this bit about that how there is already they're kind of that public for them, and what they're actually is offering is a kind of customized content to pander to that taste, right? So Kavi Singh, for instance, you mentioned those two episodes when after Pulwama attack she wrote a song, and that how that became viral, and then after the abrogation of Article 317 Jammu and Kashmir, that song viral. But when she wrote other songs which talked generally about Hinduism or a good way of life or whatever, that didn't work. So do you think in all of and most of the in all their cases, in fact, that there is a kind of audience which is ready, which is humongous, uh, even though a bit amorphous, but there is a kind of space that has been already created, and what they're actually doing is just filling in that space.
No, absolutely, Navid. I mean, it tells a lot about our Indian audiences when someone like a Kavi Singh, she hits the high note with the first song, which is about Pulwama, about the terror attack. But in the song, she's largely trying to, create a sense of anger and fear towards and against Kashmiri Muslims, especially. Because he's saying, who are these people? These are our people who have helped the terrorists. These are the people who need to be attacked and not Pakistan. So she did that, and she clearly stoked the sort of the Hindutva agenda further. But then after that, when she tries to do other things, when she, as you said, she's trying to do ostensibly benign songs. I mean, I remember there is one song she does about water awareness. There is another song which sort of extols India's history, and sort of
Yes.
extols historical figures. So somewhat, I mean, actually mostly non-controversial songs that she's trying to do, and none of these songs really find her the kind of takers that her song Pulwama did. So what does that also tell you? That tells you that there is a large and a substantial proportion of the Indian audience who wants Hindutva to be a part of the pop culture, who want to have fear and anger as dominating emotions towards Muslims and towards other critics and towards other minorities. Hindutva sells extremely well right now, and hence at some point she then, sort of almost cynically takes a turn towards just giving the audience what they want, because she's clearly tried a lot of things and nothing seems to work as much as Hindutva does. So we're clearly seeing a larger and larger audience for this song, or for this kind of pop culture, not just songs, but this kind of pop culture. And that for me is somewhat disconcerting, because that only means that more and more players and more artists will see the incentive to be wanting to do similar things. When hate becomes the incentive, what you do get is hate speech and hateful conduct. And if hate can reward you, then why not? So that is really, in essence, the problem here, that hate is being rewarded not just by social media platforms who are letting it go, but by the audience who's clearly hungry for more and more.
Mm, mm, mm. And in all the cases, I mean, of course, that's something which has actually led to the weaponizing of this form. In fact, uh, the popular culture, these forms of be it songs, or be it poetry, or be it books and publishing. So technology, I think, in common to all three, the stories of all these three people is how technology has made it possible for them to reach out to a great number of people at a time. And considering the fact that even Kavi Sammelans have become something which go viral more on social media handles than when they actually take place in some kind of remote village in UP or elsewhere in the country, and especially the northern parts of the country. And I was thinking that how do you see this, the role of technology in some sense intrinsically intrinsic to the story of rise of fame?
I think technology has been an extremely crucial ally for all of these Hindutva pop players. All of the people I've profiled and all of the people I've spoken to have depended very, very heavily on technology as the carrier of a lot of the work that they do, be it music, be it poetry, be it books. All of these formats have depended very heavily on technology, and in their place, what all of these social media platforms have done is basically to just in some ways give these Hindutva pop artists a free pass, to be to be able to, or to want to do whatever they want to do. Um, and and the proof of that is the fact that none of them seem to really have got a very major indictment from any of these social media platforms, despite what a lot of what their work is actually constitutes pure and simple hate speech. When you call for violence against a group of people on the basis of their caste, when you ask for them to be boycotted, this is all clear hate speech. And yet all of these players have very massive popular personas on social media. So that really just tells you that social media has very happily looked the other way, while all of these players build their bases, strengthen and mobilize people more and more through their online personas. And in similar way, technology is something that they've constantly used to reinvent themselves and reach more and more people. I mean, just the fact that a song is released on YouTube, for instance, but it also goes on to all of these different platforms. No, I mean, and exactly why is when I say that technology has been an ally, a very powerful ally for all of them, this is what I mean. All of these people have massive fan following, and sort of subscriber bases on some of the biggest platforms that there are. You can name Facebook, you can name Twitter, you can name Instagram, you can name YouTube. They're all are present on all of these platforms. They All of these platforms become in some ways the carriers of the work that they do. And yet I mentioned that platforms like Facebook and sometimes YouTube have taken some action against some of these people, for instance, in Kavi's case as well as Kamal's case. But to be very honest, Naved, I mean, the action that they take is really a light slap on the wrist. There is nothing very significant, because ultimately all of these people are now back on the very same platforms, doing the very same work that first got them into trouble in the first place. So essentially, what happens is it becomes a thing where the platform will either block them off for a few days, or ban them, or ask them to create a new account, and they do that promptly, and then they are back doing the same thing again. Um, and and which is why I say that both social media platforms as well as technology, both of these have been very, very powerful friends and allies for Hindutva pop to grow and to prosper. I can be very categorical in saying that Hindutva pop wouldn't be as popular as it is today if not for social media platforms.
I also found it very interesting the way you have sort of you tell each of these stories, and also in some sense, these nuggets about that, who they are, where they come from, where they came from, and what informs their choice in some sense. And in the case of Kavi Singh, for instance, the role of her father, and he himself is a well-known figure in Haryana, right? And
Haryanvi music,
how
yes. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So then how he himself sort of, and of course there has been they have fallen out, you write about that, but I would rather want readers to discover on their own rather than revealing anything about the story. But just quickly to give some sense of how these people are, or sort of your idea behind approaching them on a level where you share these personal these nuggets about their personal life. That was also very crucial to you in that sense, to understand who these people are and what they are doing, for what they are doing. And of course in most of these cases they are driven by in some sense opportunism is something that drives them all, and to as we were discussing, that to benefit from the powers that be, and in different ways. So if you could talk about that a little bit.
I mean, look, David, I was very clear that I didn't want to approach them from a place of judgment. I
Yes.
think I think essentially, as journalists, we all learn that when we first come into the profession. I remember in journalism class, we used to be told that you should be able to speak to anyone. It can be a drug peddler, it can be someone accused of a rape, it can be a murder convict, but you should still be able to talk to all of them and understand all of their points of views, and tell all of their stories. And I think it is increasingly relevant in times like these, where we're only being more and more polarized towards our individual sort of political positions, and we're refusing to engage, and unwilling to see any merits in the other person's arguments at all, if they differ from us politically. So I was very conscious that I didn't want to fall into the trap where I go and sort of present my political leanings, and tell them that this is what I believe in, and why won't you believe in this, right? I think as journalists, our job is crucial because we're just the carriers of these different worlds, from one world to another. My job was to really take this secretive world out of the space where it exists, and bring it in a manner as unbiased as possible, to an audience which has possibly no sense of who these people are, and no sense of the existence of their work. And I didn't want to be the mediator who's telling the reader what to think and what to believe in. I really just wanted all of these three characters to speak for themselves, and for their work to speak for what they want to do. So I was very clear that I would not be in the position where I would go into debates, or sort of heated arguments with them. I was essentially there to understand why they were doing what they were doing, and just sort of try and make people understand the implications of their work. And I felt that the only way I could do this is to treat them as equals, and to treat them, and very rightly so, as people who justifiably have their own viewpoints. So I didn't want to sort of get into that space where I would decide and have preconceived notions about what they should be saying or what they should not be saying. So I was hoping that people are able to make judgments on themselves, and not depend on me as the author to tell them what to think and what not to think.
That's very well said, Kunal. Actually, as our storytellers, we try to be as empathetic as possible, and I think that's what you do in the book. And that really, I think, shot through that with that kind of empathy also in in the manner that you tell their stories. Uh, the book, of course,
I mean,
is
look,
some kind of
it's also, I also wanted to just, I mean, you mentioned empathy, Navid, and I feel like I think trying to understand them as fellow citizens with fears like ours, like ours,
Yes.
or like yours. If you're the reader, if you see that, okay, they have similar fears, they possibly have similar aspirations. They may not be similar in the exact content of what the aspiration is. I mean, some of them might want to become political leaders, and you don't want to. But essentially, I think they're also looking for a better future for themselves.
Absolutely.
So are you, the reader, right? They're also like in Ramkesh and Kavi's case. I mean, Ramkesh is essentially just a doting father wanting the best for his child, and
Yeah.
so would any father or mother who's possibly reading the book. So I think there are all of these commonalities that bind us as human beings. I think our political differences just tend to make us forget that there are similarities as well, and my job was to also make people understand that there are, they might be doing things that you don't agree with, but there are reasons driving all of those actions and also their thoughts, which is why I sort of look at why the point at which they started believing in the Hindu right-wing ideology.
Hmm. Right. No, that's true. And but Kunal, that also brings me to a question about the. Of course, we began with the genesis of the book, but with the book, what you're trying to actually do is also warn us about the kind of, in some way, if I can say that, about how this story is unfolding in India in a political backdrop, which all of us are aware of the kind of extent to which it has already gone and in future will go. We are on the cusp of 2024. The elections are months away. What kind of future do you see from here onwards? How is the India story going to unravel in years to come?
I think what we're seeing, Naved, is somewhat detached to the political project that the BJP might be working on. And I say this in the book as well, that it might look like it is running in conjunction with the BJP's electoral might, but I think
Yes.
somewhat sadly it has taken a life of its own, where there's a larger cultural project that is unraveling across the country through one of the mediums being popular culture. So what we're seeing is that people are forgetting old friendships which were across faiths, across religions. People are forgetting all ways of lives, a more syncretic sort of life that they used to lead. I have traveled to a number of villages, and one of the things that I've done repeatedly is revisited places where hate crimes have happened. Where there have been religion-driven hate crimes, from one religion to another, and what I mostly almost always see is how, before the hate crime, they both sides and both people of both religions used to live a life which was extremely normal, extremely amiable, and sort of had ties with each other. I mean, I remember going to a village in Uttar Pradesh where a Muslim man had been lynched, and sort of the lynching was done by the Hindu Yuva Vahini members, and there is a court case which is still on. And I remember going there and talking to villagers, and them telling me how the Muslim man and some of the other Muslim families would sometimes play host to Hindu relatives of some of the villagers, in case there's less space and there's a wedding happening in the house. These guys would pitch in. The Muslim families would sometimes be told to cook for the Hindu families, because they were so known for their cooking. And there were all of these ties that were binding both people of both religions. But when the lynching happened, and soon after that, when the family members of the man who was lynched, when they decided to leave the village because they didn't feel safe, one of the most heartbreaking things I saw from the villagers is that not a single one of those Hindu villagers came and said, stop, you don't have to leave the village, we are here to protect you, right? So that has ended. And the reason why I also wrote this book is because I feel like popular culture is enabling, sort of the culmination of such syncretic traditions and friendships every single day, every single minute. Each time you listen to a song which dehumanizes a Muslim, or dehumanizes Islam as a religion, or villainizes Christians and Muslims as enemies of India, enemies of Hindus, what you're doing is you're letting the hate get deeper into you. right? And it may not be acted upon immediately. You may not find that that person is going to go ahead and maybe attack someone or engage in a riot, but the hate will remain inside of them, and every single time they hear the music, they listen to poetries, they read these books, the hate is only going to go deeper and deeper. And the trouble here is, Naved, one doesn't know when that hate is going to be acted upon. We don't know when is that point going to come. And that is what is so disturbing about this world.
Yeah, indeed. Well, on that note, Kunal, it was really lovely talking to you. I'm sure those of us who are interested in not just pop culture, but also the story of India and where we are headed, will read this book. Thank you so much, Kunal, for taking the time out for talking to us.
Navid, it's been an
May the book.
absolute pleasure. Thank you for your sharp questions, and I hope that you engaged with the book, and I hope you liked it, and I hope that more and more people read it, because I feel like, I think the more we understand what is happening with the country, the better placed we are to be able to deal with it and somewhat counter it as well. So I do hope that more and more people seeing the Federal and reading the Federal go ahead and buy the book for themselves.
Of course. Absolutely, Kunal. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Subscribe to the Federal's YouTube page for more news and updates.